the trick is to learn how to leverage the debt that you have and to know the difference between good debt and bad debt. This is the first time I ever realized that all debt was not inherently bad.
Welcome everybody, my name is Jacobsen Valentine. I am the executive at Feed the Mass, and today we are here with Family That Learns with Adesina Cameron. Thank you for being here today. We're going to be talking a little bit more about finances, and one of the big things, of course, is like we all have a dream to own our own house, and what is the process and everything like that. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself, like your business, and like, you know, give people the 411 about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Adesina Cameron, and I am a loan officer. I like to call myself a mortgage planning specialist. My company is DC Lending. I run the Portland branch. The rest of the company is in Vancouver. And what I do is I bring the information that you just talked about. How do I get that American dream? What do I need to know to start that roadmap to home ownership? So I work with people to understand their qualifications and then get them qualified if they need that. And after that, my team does the actual process of getting you a loan from somebody that we work with and getting you into your new house.
Perfect. I think this is something, as a young person myself, I always feel that it was like, oh, maybe it's just not in deck of cards, but like I think the conversations that we've had in the, like before this, actually think it's actually more achievable than I think other people would think, which is great.
Yeah, well, the reason that I do this is because I always thought it was not in the cards. That just I grew up as a renter. My mom somehow bought a house when I was in high school through a government program that I didn't understand, but I just thought, well, that's not in the cards for me, and why would I want to fix my own toilet, right? So I just didn't pay attention to it. And then when my daughter was born and I moved to Portland and I found out that rent control is not a nationwide government program and that my rent could go up $500, I finally reached out to somebody to find out what I could do. And what I learned, especially now that I'm in the business, is that I was actually way more qualified 10 years before that when I was working, and the price of housing was $100,000 less. So I suddenly got hip to this information that changed my entire life and brought wealth to my daughter in the future and happiness to me. And so that's really the reason I do what I do, is because that information is specifically withheld from certain types of people. We have a history in this country of power being built on wealth and property, but keeping the information about how to get that from the masses. So I am here to feed the masses with information about generational wealth.
Oh, I like how you did that. That was very under the radar, but I love it. So let's get into our first question, which of course is going to be, tell me about credit score. What is a credit score? Because I think this is the thing that I've been working on as a young person, because I pretty much destroyed my credit when I was a teenager, getting my first credit card because my teacher said, hey, you need to get a credit card in order to like build your credit. And then of course I was like, oh, you know, let's go to Taco Bell every day for an entire year. And then all of a sudden you realize I still can't pay for this credit card. So what is a credit score and what is that, how kind of related to a credit card, I guess?
Okay, let's start out with, it's a game. For sure. The credit bureaus, the credit card companies, they're trying to game you. So what you got to do is learn how to use that game to your advantage, but not fall in the trap, because you must have credit in this country to get car insurance, to buy a home, for all sorts of things. But it's also really easy to get into debt. So let's distinguish the difference between credit and debt. So your credit score is a number assigned to you based on your spending behavior by the 3 credit bureaus who somehow have permission to run our lives. So that is your credit score. And there are many, many types of formulas used. So if you see one thing when you buy a car, it'll be different when I look at it to get a mortgage. It'll be different on Credit Karma. So, but what I like to say to people is, get on Credit Karma, follow your score like it's your favorite Instagram star. Because you now have the tools. When I was young, you couldn't see what your score was. So when you finally applied for something, you'd be shocked to find out what was there. Now, public information, you can look at that. So that's number one. Your credit score is assigned to you based on how you pay, what credit you have, that type of stuff. Debt is something different. That's the amount of money that you owe to other people. So what they want you to do to get your credit score is to get into debt. And they want you to have negative debt because they make more money when you can't pay it. Whereas debt can be leveraged, and this is the important part here. People who own homes have debt, right? I have a $500,000 mortgage. That is a huge debt. But the trick is to learn how to leverage the debt that you have and to know the difference between good debt and bad debt.
Okay. So I guess, like, how does credit score really affect your buying power? Because because like you said, it's these 3 like mysterious organizations that are saying like, this is your credit score, no, this is your credit score, no, this is your credit score. And how does that like affect your buying power? Because I think that's kind of like the big thing is like, I feel that when I first started, it was like interest rate was 20% and you get $500 and you're like, and I'm like, okay, so what does that equate to? So like, how does buying power work?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, the credit score affects the rates that you're offered for your car insurance and all sorts of stuff like that. So there are things in your background that you're being charged differently from somebody else that you don't even know about it, right? When you buy a home, we talk about your credit score.
Yeah.
But for those other things, they don't see your score, they're just told good rate, bad rate. So that's one thing. But very specifically, when it comes to buying a home, you have to have a certain credit score to qualify to buy a home. Now, there are hundreds of loan programs. There are probably 5 that I work with frequently. So the lowest credit score I've ever worked with is probably 615.
Okay.
So credit scores range from about 450 to 850.
Okay.
So, but the lower your credit is, sometimes you can't qualify at all. Sometimes you can't qualify for the program that you want, but the lower your score, whatever you qualify for, your terms will be worse. So higher interest, possibly additional fees.
Of course.
And so the better your credit is, first you have to qualify. That's step one, and that's the first thing that we look at. If you're not there, I have people who can help you get there.
Yeah.
After you're qualified, your rate, your interest rate that you pay for 30 years on a 30-year loan is determined. So if you and I have the same income, all other factors the same, but you have a 710 and I have a 740, over the process of 30 years, you're gonna pay a lot more money for that same house than I have. And because your rate plays into what you're qualified for, you're actually gonna qualify for a lower purchase price than I would, even if we have the same down payment and the same income. If I'm getting better terms, I'm gonna be able to qualify for, say, 425 when you can only qualify for 4.
Wow. Okay. No, that's perfect. So let's get into what is the best way to build credit, because like I said, when I was in high school, they were like, just get a credit card, just get a credit card. Doesn't matter, just get a credit card. Like, what would you say to an 18-year-old who's becoming an adult? How would be the best way to build their credit?
Yeah, and absolutely. And first I wanna say, I fell into that same thing, 100%. Went to college, you want a Frisbee? Sign up for this credit card. Yay, Frisbee, right? And so that definitely happened to me. And it's really important that people don't have judgment around credit, because it can feel really bad to feel like you have messed up your credit or fallen into the trap. And sometimes you knew what you were doing and you had to do it to support your family.
Yep.
So let's start there. But so with credit, basically it's a couple of different factors, right? You must make your payments on time. That is the number one thing, not making your payments, that will ruin your credit.
Yep.
So it's how much credit you have, how much of that you're using. So if you have a $500 credit limit, but you pay every time on time, but you've got a $499 balance, you're gonna have a really low credit score. Versus, so one of the tricks is to continuously work on getting your limits increased if you're not spending it. So the idea here is they wanna see that you have a lot of credit, but somehow you're not using it.
Yeah.
So the best way to establish great credit is to get a couple of credits, and we'll provide resources for this, because it changes all the time.
Oh,
so
for
don't
sure.
just take my word for it. Check in.
The link will be in the description.
Yeah, so, but really, it takes having 2 or 3 credit cards. You put your Netflix on one, you set that for auto pay statement balance,
Okay.
right? Because if you don't have $11.99 for Netflix, then either you shouldn't have Netflix or you shouldn't be asking to buy a house. We can be on a plan, but you're not buying yet. So Netflix on one, buy a cup of coffee on one, or if you just spread it out, pay it, spend it, pay it, spend it. $10 even every 2 months, that is all that you need to really get started.
Yeah.
And then there's lots of resources on how you can get those credit cards in the first place or continue to build it. But paying on time and not using the maximum credit allotted to you are the number one ways. So for parents, right, if you can, when I went to finally buy my first house, I have had a medical bankruptcy. I've gone into debt consolidation. I had a lot of trouble along the way. And so when I finally went, I thought, oh Lord, because this was before Credit Karma. So he pulls it up and I've got an 805.
Oh my goodness.
So the way that happened was my mom put me as an authorized user on her credit card when I was like 17 or whatever the minimum limit was, because I was a latchkey kid and she wanted me to have something just in case. So that's a great tip for people, is to put your child, you really need to actually pay attention that nobody has already stolen your child's identity.
True.
And start building credit and teaching your child about building credit from about 16 on.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think when we talk about like what has holded a lot of groups of people, and the wealthy versus the unwealthy is like these little tips and tricks, because I think to say that your kid can't have good credit by the time they graduate college, I mean, that's not true. It's just you don't understand how it can happen.
Right.
And so this is why we're doing these videos. So I love it.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So let's talk about part 2, which is job history and, learning to qualify for 24 months work history. So tell me a little bit more about that. How is job history super important?
Yeah, so basically we're talking about, there's 5 main areas that the lender and myself will look at. One of those is how long you have been actively working in the United States. So you got to have 24 months of job history.
Yep.
So what's important about that is, for example, I had a job once, I got a little bit of money, I left the country. What I didn't know was that had I tried to buy, even though I came right back into a job, I would not have been eligible because I had not been working in the United States for a full 24 months. So the job history category is understanding that doesn't have to be the same job, has to be similar field. We can paint that story for, admin assistant, for almost whatever you need to do. So consistent job history for 24 months. And in addition, if you are W-2 versus 1099 self-employed, it is completely different. And some people don't understand that they're self-employed. I have dealt with people who, they know they're getting a 1099, but they don't know what that means, and they don't understand that they are a self-employed person.
So, can you give me some examples of self-employed people who would not know they're self-employed? I guess.
Yeah. So there's been that whole debate about all the gig economy, Uber drivers, all of those people. Are they contractors? In their mind, you're a contractor, but a contractor is just another term for self-employed. So that's a big category of people. So you've got maybe a steady W-2 job. But you're making money, and maybe you've been doing it for a year, and you think finally, okay, together, I'm making enough money, I'm gonna go apply. Well, that Uber driving is contract self-employment and is not going to count until you've been doing it not just for 2 months, but have 2 years of filed taxes.
Oh, okay.
And the way we look at that money is gonna be real different from the way that you look at it. So if you make your money anyway, but straight W-2 salary, you need to work with a professional like me to understand what the lender sees in your job history, not what you see in your paycheck.
So it goes into, I guess, our next part, which is qualifying income, which we kind of talked a little bit about.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about that. But so in addition to how long you have been working, there are certain types of income that count and don't count. So we'll start with just your hourly wage. But if you are in the restaurant industry and your hours vary, or maybe you're collecting tips and not reporting them, that's a big one. I have an agent that I work with. She bought her first house by reporting her tips for 2 years. She might have over-reported them. You didn't hear it from me. And so she was able, so yes, she paid taxes on that, but she also sold that house for $250,000 more 5 years later.
Okay.
Right? So, but also if your money comes from overtime or commission, it's going to be treated very differently, and there's going to be averages into the past. So one of my best friends, I couldn't get them qualified because he's got a great job, but he drives a lot, and he's doing like 10, 15 hours a week of overtime, but he's only worked there for 1 year. If he had 2 years of overtime, it would count. It does not count. So it's nuanced, and it changes constantly. The advice that you can get online and from your parents and your coworkers is often very outdated. So that's really the thing, is the lender is using statistics from however long of home ownership to make arbitrary decisions about who they think will default and who will not, and how much to charge them. So you need to understand how the lender looks at your specific circumstances, which I promise you are totally illogical and will make no sense.
Well, talking about income, I guess the question is, and I think for me, I think this is where it kind of changed my mind about if it's in the cards for me or not, but do you have to be rich to actually buy a home?
That's a great question. And no, you don't have to be rich to buy a home, right? You do have to have some down payment money, although I have access to one program that can help you with that down payment money. There are other resources here in Portland that have more grant money than I have. So you don't have to be rich to buy a home. I was taught that you got to save up that 20%. If you have less than 20%, there's something called mortgage insurance, which people are afraid of like it's the plague or the COVID.
The COVID.
Yeah.
I like that. Or no plague, the COVID.
Yeah. You really don't have to be afraid of it because the minimum down payment to buy a house can be as low as 3%.
Oh, wow.
Pre-COVID, there were even 1% down programs. Those have mostly dried up. But so you do have to have some money, but you absolutely do not have to be rich or wealthy to buy a house. It's the way you get wealthy, but you don't have to start out that way.
Exactly. I love that. I love that. So what is the ideal kind of income and what is the not so ideal income?
The ideal kind of income is either really well documented self-employment that you've been doing for several years,
Sweet.
or just a salary, a yearly W-2
Definitely.
salary.
And you can, and my question on this one is, can you be like you own the business, but like put yourself as a W-2 employee under your business? Is that like a loophole or no?
There are no loopholes.
Oh, okay.
Let me take that back. There are loopholes on the lender's side, never in your favor. So what we do with self-employed people is we take your taxes. I run a very simple formula that says, look on line 31, look on line 16. So if you're paying yourself a salary, that's going to come out on the taxes. And the formula's job is to back stuff out, put stuff back in, because your CPA's job is to make it look like you don't have any money for your taxes. We know that's not true. So we try to prove that you've got some money. So if you are, you can't double hit yourself. You can't claim it as an expense, but then also pay yourself. We will comb through and find all of the stuff.
Well, now we're at like the fourth topic, which is assets and down payment. So tell me a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so a down payment is when you buy a house, you got to put some skin in the game. So there's a certain percentage of cash that you're expected to come up with 30 days later when you close on the house. So that can be anywhere from 3%, which most people think it's got to be a lot more than that, all the way up to, you could put 100%, but you'd be buying in cash. But a thing that a lot of people don't know is I talk a lot of clients out of putting more than 20% down. Because there's a benefit. Remember I talked about that leveraging good debt versus bad debt. There's a benefit to keeping your cash in your pocket or in the stock market or however you have it invested and using somebody else's cash at a low interest rate. If you can earn money elsewhere or even help family elsewhere or donate it for your soul elsewhere. So the asset is just how much money are you going to put down. So what's important is that it must be your money.
Yeah.
Right? You are required to show that you have had this money in your possession in your bank accounts for 60 days or 2 bank statement cycles. So you can't get gift money. It must be from a friend or a relative. So sometimes people think, oh, well, I can take money from my credit card and you can't borrow money to buy a house.
Yeah.
So the assets are just how much money you're going to put down. And so we need to not only know that you have it, but it does have to be sourced appropriately.
Definitely. So I want to go back to the down payment because you kind of just jumped over this. It actually is super valuable, the 20% thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that is really super important that people understand this because I only recently saw that like the 3% versus 20% conversation on social media. I know social media, but it was super important because like if you had 20% down, great, but don't do it because if you were to save that 17%, you're able to use it to build you wealth.
Exactly.
So can you expand a little bit more on that? Because I'm my basic idea of that versus.
Well, your idea comes probably from the same place that my idea did was that debt is always bad. So you go in with the most money that you can, you pay down that house as soon as possible. And my dream was always to live in a house that I didn't have a housing payment for, right? And when I told my first mortgage broker that, he said, or what if you didn't do that? What if you put that money into something for your daughter? And this is the first time I ever realized that all debt was not inherently bad.
Yeah.
So right now, however I feel about the stock market, the truth is over time, it does well for people. So if your interest that you're paying on your mortgage is 3%, but you can make 16% over time or even 8% over time in the stock market. I don't really like to do math, but you can do the math.
Yeah.
That is a better thing to do with your money is pay money out monthly using somebody else's money and take that remainder of your money. And one of the reasons people used to hate to do it was when you put down less than 20%, there is mortgage insurance. But it's not as much. Most people that I work with, their mortgage insurance is somewhere between $50 and $120, and it doesn't last forever on most loans.
And that's a month per month.
That's a month.
Yeah.
Right. So, but it's all about the numbers. So even though I don't like to do math, it is my job. And when I work with an individual, we will compare what's the best case scenario for you, including I'll ask you questions about your money goals and your life goals, because it's not always mathematical.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have emotional things happening in their life or certain goals that are just important to them. So we take those into account. We take your time and energy into account because people don't account.
Yeah.
That matters, right?
Yeah.
So 20%, is not always, first of all, 20% of a $600,000 house is a lot of money.
Yeah.
And most people don't have that, but
If you
3%.
did, yeah.
Plus closing costs
Yeah.
of a $300,000 condo, a lot of people can
Yeah.
do that with a plan.
And I think that mentality is also like a mistake people do after they buy their first house as well. They're like, oh, I got all this wealth now.
Roll it in.
I'm gonna go and I'm gonna make it cheaper. But I think we can put up a little graphic at this point where that talks about the difference between a 3%. If you had the 20%, down for a house, and we had the 3%, we'll put it up for you guys to kind of see the math a little bit for you guys.
I have charts and
Sweet.
tools that I
Yeah.
use for people every day that I can send you.
Love
The other piece there is the real play there is don't sell your first house, turn it into a rental, and then buy a new house. And if you're really getting into it, first you pull some extra equity out of that first house. So now you've got the cash down payment for the next house,
Yep.
and then you make it into a rental. So that's what the game is all about, is what are the steps that people of money have taken just because they're taught by their family over time. They're not as hard as you think. They're not easy.
No.
It takes work, it takes dedication.
Exactly.
Sometimes you have to sacrifice your lattes and some stuff like that,
Yep.
but it is very doable to have a couple of investment properties if you start young.
Yeah. Well, I'm young and I'm starting.
You are.
So there we go. So what would be your first step to starting or building up your down payment?
The very first step of this entire process is mental. Right?
okay.
You get a Post-it, you write it on the Post-it. I am so happy and grateful to be on the road to home ownership. You put that on the mirror, you look at it, you say it every day. That's
Yeah.
literally the first step
Okay.
to this whole process.
Love
and
it.
to understanding that this is a mindset, right? That you're going to have to change your limiting beliefs, some sort of, I was raised really to believe that if you had money, you were a bad person. So the first step is getting into your brain about your money beliefs, what you're spending your money on, are you keeping track of it? So that's all kind of just a little internal conversation to have with yourself. But then the real first step would be to start looking at, take your paycheck, almost every place you can split your direct deposit. So even if it's little as take 5% of your paycheck and put it into a different account.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. So if you're really trying to save for a down payment, is I would do it automatically.
Yeah.
Having to wait till the end of the month and say, what do I have left? In fact, I'm going to go back and do this again for myself this year. It's on my task list to make sure that I've got that all properly set up and that it's being just cut right off the top and put into a savings
Separate.
account for that. But then also to come to me and get the information about what it is that you would need, because it's different for everybody. Right? And sometimes when if it's $8,000-9,000 and people already have it.
Yeah.
The other option, anybody who has a 401k already, there are some great options to borrow your own money, use it to buy a house, and then put it back over time.
Oh, wow.
But that's the first step, is make your savings automatic.
All right. So small side story. Because you said it, what made you think having money was bad?
Well, I grew up in San Francisco in the 70s. I didn't eat a grape till I was like 10 because we were always boycotting for the farm workers or, something or other. And so I just kind of got this impression from the world. I don't believe my mother said it to me directly, was that the oil, I actually didn't know any rich people, so I couldn't have said that they were nice, right?
Yeah.
I knew one girl who lived in a regular middle class house who I thought was super rich. But just the impression that I got from the world in the 70s and protests and stuff was that, bad people have money. If you had money, you'd give it all away to poor people, which is not true. You got to put your own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
You have to take care of yourself and your health and your family. And when you do that, that's how you spread your wealth. When you spend your money in line with your values and take care of the people around you and take care of yourself, that's not connected at all to your money. You're not a bad person because you have money. You're a bad person if you do bad shit with your money.
Yeah. No. I 100% agree.
I had to go to a lot of therapy to get into that, though. No joke.
We're having therapy right now for everybody. All right. So last topic is going to be DTI, debt to income. What is that ratio?
Debt to income ratio. So that is very simply the amount of money you earn in a given month or year versus the amount of money that you spend. So when we talked about good debt versus bad debt, bad debt is when your monthly payments all combined are more than the money that you have every month. That is absolutely a bad situation, and anybody that's in that kind of situation needs to get help right away. Because that's just going to continue to snowball and get bad. But everybody has a debt to income ratio, and so one of the things I first tell people to do is the bank's going to calculate it based on all those things we already talked about, and you can't calculate your lender debt to income ratio. But you can get out a spreadsheet or one of the 10,000 internet tools and really make a list of all the things that you must pay every month, or there is a consequence, right? Your electricity, even though cell phones are optional, you still got to pay them, or there's a consequence. So making a list of all of those things, before you even get to budgeting the optional stuff, how does that compare to how much money you make every month? And then how much money is left for that optional stuff? But before that, after you pay the bills, you go to savings. And then you figure out how much money to spend on the optional stuff. So budgeting is actually something that makes me really anxious, and I don't like to get granular with it. Some people like to get all into the spreadsheet and the nitty gritty. Whatever way that you do it, you have to know where your money's going. So that's one of the first steps too, is to understand your own debt to income ratio. But the bank has really different ways of looking at it. So we talked about all that income that might not count. I've dealt with several people this year, self-employed, did poorly in 2020, doing great in 20. And actually, I dealt with a guy who's got food trucks. He did fantastic in 2020 and 2021, but because of the way they calculate his income, he couldn't qualify. So your debt to income ratio is everything that shows up on your credit report, plus any child support or legal judgments that we're going to find out. No, you can't hide them. And this new monthly housing payment. It's all of those things compared to the amount of money that you make in a month. And the final lending guideline on every property is what is your debt to income ratio for that particular property. And it has to be under usually 50%, closer to 40 is better.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. So like if you're trying to, of course, get your own like house and everything like that, if your bills cost $3,000, you should be making close to say $6,500 to $7,000 a month. I think that's fair.
Correct.
Perfect. So my last question is going to be, why is it important to own a home? Because I know like this is like there's the forever renters who's like, I don't want to own a home, and just more heartache and everything like that. Why do you feel it is important that we own a home?
Okay, this is a fantastic question, and this is what I didn't understand until I was 40. So I thought I was getting off easy because I lived in Oakland where rent was low, but there's a couple of reasons. Obviously, I love gardening. Once I figured out that I was moving every year and losing all of the stuff that I put into that soil, that was actually the first thing for me that triggered the idea that maybe I needed to have a place and stay there. And there are lots of statistics about how homeowners are, great neighbors and stuff, but that's all can be great if you're a renter too. It's about the equity. So property grows in value without you doing anything about it. So as an example, I bought my first condo here in Portland for $208,000. I sold it 2 years later for $290,000.
That's a large chunk of change.
Not only did I not pay somebody else's mortgage by paying rent, so at that time my rent was $1,600 a month, which I already could not afford. Right? So not only did I put that money into somebody else's mortgage, I paid my own mortgage, and I made $80,000 just by living in that house for 2 years.
Wow.
That is the crux of it right there, is property appreciation.
And if you break it down for those, that's, if it's $1,600 a month, times that by 12, you're looking at about, I want to say, oh my goodness, I'm really bad at math, about $20,000 that you are putting in someone else's pocket, and do that by 2, that's 40. You made an extra $40,000 in 2 years.
Correct. And then I use that to roll that. Well, actually, before that, when I had to go back to work, I knew I started out with my baby laying on my lap, and I was like, this is just not working. So, but I had to send her to daycare. So we actually refinanced the house and took money out of the house, took $20,000 out of the house to pay off some debts and get daycare for 6 months so I could start working. Right? And so that's part of it, is a home is a resource to more wealth and money. So that money starts to build up. It's like a big old bank account. You're living in it, you're paying your mortgage, that money starts to build up. There are ways that you can tap back in to that equity and pull it out for consolidating debt, going to school. I just worked with a woman who needed a surgery her insurance wouldn't cover. And so she said, I'm taking it out of the house, right?
So you're becoming your own bank.
Sort of,
Yeah.
you know? So that's really what it's about, is that you get into a house now, it will just appreciate over time, and then you have choices. This is really about choices. You want to stay there and let it build up for your entire life and then sell it for $500,000 and go to the Bahamas for your retirement, you could do that. You want to pull money out to send your kids to college, you want to sell it and get a bigger house. Now that's what we did. We bought a bigger house. So those are all of the things that you're allowed to do with the equity in your home. And that's the part. It's not really about, sometimes your mortgage is usually more than your rent. A lot of things online and stuff will say you could buy a house for just as much as you're paying rent. That's, depending on where you live, that's mostly bullshit, right? Almost all of my clients, except for the ones that are living in the Pearl, pay a couple $100s more for their mortgage than they did for their rent.
Yeah.
But I have plenty of resources that I can send to you. Over time, though, within a couple of years, based on the 6% average rent increase, oh no, actually this year, average rent increases were 12%.
Oh, wow.
According to these CoreLogic stats that came out last week. So what happens is over time, when you have a mortgage, it stays the same unless you voluntarily change it.
Yep.
You cannot control your rent. So eventually you say, I can't afford $2,000 right now. Well, how are you going to afford that $3,000 rent when you don't have a choice? Your mortgage will still be $2,000 in 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So that's really, it's the control of your own future and not having to move time. I've probably moved 100 times in my life.
Yeah.
I'm tired of it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's the having the control, it's the having your own soil, which means something, and the equity that you build up with. And then what I learned, I did this exercise once at a conference where you stand in a line, and it was mostly all older white people at this conference, and they ask you these questions. Step backwards if you went to college, step forward, you know, all of this type of stuff. And so we're doing this, and I'm kind of in line with everybody, and then they get to the step forward if you inherited a house, right? And so they all step forward. And then everything that starts coming after that, even though I started at the middle, and by then I was kind of doing all right, I ended up at the back of the room. Because at that point I hadn't inherited anything.
Wow.
So a lot of times what people are giving to their children is not because they started out rich, it's because they bought a house and then it appreciated, you know.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's perfect. All right, guys. Well, I want to wrap things up. Thank you so much for being here. If you guys want to find more information about Adesina Cameron and her organization,
www.mortgageswithadesina.com. You know I'm old because I said the www in the comment.
No, yeah.
Mortgages with Adesina is my website. And I'm sure there'll be lots of links to it, and we'll provide some resources and stuff like that.
Definitely. And if you guys felt this was actually super, helpful for you, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.
Hopefully we're going to have you back, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be lots of comments down below about how we can actually even improve on this and make it bigger. So thank you guys, and thank you. Bye.
Thanks.